Hello, everyone. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Atsuhiko Nakata, one of Japan's most popular comedians, and its top educational YouTuber. At first glance, titles like world history or literature might sound a bit academic or even intimidating, but once you start listening, you'll be completely captivated, laughing and learning all the way through. It's truly a magical experience. The only downside is that the audio is in Japanese only, and subtitles alone can't fully capture the magic of his storytelling. And if you're reading instead of just listening, it's hard to enjoy while doing other things. So today, I've translated one of his masterpieces, The History of Great Britain, into English, and used an AI voice to replicate his signature speaking style as closely as possible. I hope you enjoy this one-of-a-kind blend of education and entertainment.
2,000 years of one family feud after another. It's a bloodbath. As long as you call it Igirisu, the Japanese word for Britain, you'll never truly understand it. It's the United Kingdom. And that's why it's so complicated. Britain isn't just one country, and its very name is steeped in a long history of conflict. That's the heart of it. Hey everyone, Atsuhiko Nakata here. All right, let's dive right in. Welcome to Extreme Class, the history of Britain. The British Empire. Thank you. When you talk about Britain in world history, it feels like almost everything is a remnant of something the British did. You find yourself saying, oh, this is Britain's fault, isn't it? Or, and we have Britain to thank for this. It happens all the time, right? Not long ago, I did a quick overview of American history. I talked about how, even though it's only 250 years long, it's incredibly dense. I uploaded that video based on this book series, and next up was this one, British History in one volume. It's about the same thickness as the American history one, so I thought, all right, let's give this a shot. It was hell! Seriously! It's way tougher than you'd think. You can't put American and British history in the same category. Why? Because America has 250 years, but Britain has over 2,000 years of staggering history. And let me tell you, after reading it, I realized one thing. It is a bloodbath. For real, this stuff is insanely difficult. Here's why. In British history, ethnic groups are constantly being replaced, and within Britain itself, there are all these different territories. They're constantly conquering and being conquered, swapping places, getting invaded, and just when you think things have finally settled down, a new political power struggle erupts within the royal family. The conflict is just non-stop and bloody. You know how they have King so-and-so the first, the second, the third? Well, one king would seize power, and boom, he'd be assassinated almost immediately, leading to more chaos. It's 2,000 years of one bloody family drama after another. That's why, for today, I've decided not to write down a single one of their names. Seriously, I've barely written down any of the king something the whatever guys. That's how fast they change. So, what do I want you to teach today? When we think of Britain, we tend to focus on its rise to global fame after the Industrial Revolution, which we've covered in modern history. We get that part. But what about before that? How did Britain even come to be? What's the unique character of its history? I'm going to give you a super broad overview of that. My goal is to give you a rough sketch of how the nation of Britain was formed. So, please listen closely. All right, first off, let's look at the territory of modern-day Britain. As always, I've drawn my trusty block map. Just try to remember this layout. We Japanese call it iirisi, but apparently we're one of the few who do. It's the United Kingdom, UK. You hear UK rock, right? That's because United Kingdom is the official name. We Japanese just got stuck on an old name for it, Igirisi, from the word English. So, as long as you're calling it Igirisi, you can't officially understand Britain. It's the United Kingdom, and that's why it's complicated. As of today, it's made up of England. Yeah, you've heard of it, maybe for soccer. Scotland. Scotch. You've heard of Scotch whiskey, right? Got it. Wales. When we get to Wales, our minds turn to go blank, don't they? And then Ireland. Wait, isn't that a different country? That's probably what most of you are thinking, right? Well, the official name is actually the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So you're thinking, So only the northern part of Ireland is part of the UK? That's the crux of it. Ireland was ruled by the British for long periods, but as of now, only the northern part remains part of the UK. The other part of it became independent at a certain point. Yep. So, the United Kingdom is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It's confusing from the get-go. Don't you just wish we only had to remember England and Scotland? Like England for soccer and Scotland for whiskey? Can we just leave it at that? But no, we also have Wales and the northern part of Ireland. Please don't forget them. They came from Denmark, Norway, Sweden. The Danes, as they were called, came flooding in. For a long period, British history was just Vikings attack, we fight them off. Vikings attack, we fight them off. Just when they thought they had the internal situation under control, more would come from the north. They fought and fought, but one day they lost, badly. And for a while, Britain was incorporated into a vast territory that included Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. For a time, Britain was basically part of Scandinavia. Did you know that? Most people don't. We tend to think of Britain and Scandinavia as being totally separate, but that's not true. After being attacked by Vikings again and again, the whole area was taken over by an incredibly powerful Scandinavian king. But that didn't last either. The Scandinavians had their own chaotic succession disputes, and they couldn't control the vast territory effectively. Finally, in a battle called the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the English fought back. Take it back! Take our land back from the Scandinavians! And the very moment they finally succeeded, the very instant they thought, phew, we're finally free of them, they get invaded by France! This island just can't catch a break. This was the Norman Conquest. You've heard of Normandy from World War II, right? The Normandy landings, where Allied forces crossed the Channel from Britain to retake Paris from Hitler in the final stages of the war. Well, this invasion came from Normandy in northern France, and they were completely conquered. So after the final decisive battle that ended the Viking threat for good, they thought they were safe, and bam! France takes over. This led to an era where the Duke of Normandy from France also served as the King of England. It's a dual role. What was happening in Scotland around this time? Well, Scotland was having its own vicious wars of succession. Of course, Wales and Scotland were also fighting off pirates, but in the midst of Scotland's own internal power struggles, a figure named Macbeth appeared. Yes, that Macbeth. Much later, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, culture flourished in England, and Shakespeare emerged. His famous play, Macbeth, is set in this very era, the time when England was being absorbed into a northern empire, and Scotland was fighting over his throne. In Shakespeare's play, Macbeth becomes king and is almost immediately killed by a prince. But in reality, he was actually a pretty good king, and ruled for nearly 20 years. He was a capable ruler, but he was eventually defeated by a prince who returned to reclaim the throne. Shakespeare based his play on these historical events. Why was Shakespeare's play such a hit? The dialogue and story were brilliant, of course,
But this whole timeline shows you just how personal and real these stories of royal succession and conflict were to the people of Britain. It was like juicy gossip. They were living it constantly. And for Shakespeare, an Englishman, to write about a conflict in Scotland, that was safe. It wasn't about English drama, so the audience could enjoy it without political baggage. And since the play ends with the hero being supported by the King of England, it was very well received. Shakespeare was a genius at navigating the political landscape, creating amazing stories that also pleased those in power. So back to the Norman Conquest. They were completely conquered by Normandy. And this completely changed the cultural flow. The country, which had felt like a port of Scandinavia, was now cut off from the north and began to feel much more like a part of mainland Europe. If this hadn't happened, the cultural sphere might have been a mix of Europe, Scandinavia, and Britain. So this was a major turning point. The Duke of Normandy who led the conquest was named Guillaume. When he came to England, he started calling himself William I. He was both the vassal to the King of France and the King of England. It's a constant stream of his stuff, so honestly, just forget the names. The William I's and the dual roles aren't the point. But what the Normans brought from the French mainland was crucial. They started creating a land registry to collect taxes more efficiently. Continental culture was being imported. They registered the land and said, "I will lend you this land, and in return you will pay me taxes." This is the foundation of feudalism, the system where a monarch grants land to lords in exchange for loyalty and taxes, and was brought to Britain here. This part was a huge surprise to me. First Rome, okay, then 7 kingdoms, got it. Then it was part of Scandinavia, and then conquered by France, which is how feudalism started. Wow!
This created a stark cultural divide between the Britons and the Germanic peoples. So the Welsh have always carried this resentment of being pushed aside. And from this point on, British history revolves almost entirely around England. England is the main character, but Scotland is always resisting, the eternal rival. And Wales, well, they're the ones who are always pushed away. They've been pushed away for so long that they've sort of given up, like, all right, whatever, do what you want. And then there's Ireland. You know the flag of the United Kingdom, the Union Jack? It's pretty cool, right? That flag is a combination of England's flag, a red cross on a white background, Scotland's flag, a white X on a blue background, and Ireland's flag, a red X on a white background. They were all merged together. But Wales isn't in there. Why? Because they were conquered so early on that they weren't even part of the merger conversation. They had been attached to England for a very long time. Okay, and from the era of the 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, things get chaotic. I mean, the struggles within these 7 kingdoms alone could fill a book. They were constantly fighting each other. Just when one kingdom would think, yeah, we won, the whole situation would change. It's during this time of the 7 kingdoms that the story of Lady Godiva emerges. You know Godiva, the famous chocolate brand, right? What's that all about? Well, Lady Godiva was the wife of a lord in one of these 7 kingdoms. So what's the story? Her husband, the lord, was imposing incredibly harsh taxes on his people. More taxes, give me more. The people were suffering. Lady Godiva, being a good wife, stood up for the people. She told them, "Darling, you must stop raising the taxes." When she pleaded with him to lower the taxes, her husband, the lord, said, "Oh, you're going to talk big, are you? Are you really serious, or are you just trying to look good? Do you really care about the people?" "Of course I do," she said. "All right, then. If you ride through town on a horse completely naked, I'll do as you say." Think about the Godiva logo. It's a woman on a horse. She said, "I accept," got naked, and rode a horse through the entire town. She cast aside her own shame to protect the people of the land. That heroic woman is the namesake and logo of the Godiva Company. And the story goes that when the townspeople heard she was going to ride naked through the streets, they were so moved. "We can't look. It would be disrespectful to look upon her in such a state after what she's doing for us." So everyone closed their shutters and looked away. But one guy, a man named Tom,
couldn't resist and took a peek. And that's where the story of Peeping Tom comes from. All of this happened during the time of the Seven Kingdoms, a long, long time ago. And what about the Britons who were pushed into Wales? They have their own stories. To overcome their feeling of being oppressed, they created the tale of King Arthur. Lancelot, the Knights of the Round Table? You're thinking, yeah, I've heard of that, some kind of European legend. Well, the story of King Arthur and his knights is actually a story of the Britons who fled to Wales. Aha, I see. So you see, Caesar, King Arthur, Lady Godiva, Britannia, Londinium, these are all names you kind of know. So Roman influence vanished, and the 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were formed. They called this area Anglo-land, which is the origin of the name England. This is why people who aren't Anglo-Saxon, like the Scots or the Welsh, don't particularly like it when people use English or England to refer to the whole of Britain, because the name comes from a specific ethnic group. This national sentiment, this feeling of, hey, please don't call us that, was born right here. See? Understanding this little detail is crucial to understanding the formation of Britain and the subtle tensions within it. Britain isn't one country, and its name is steeped in a history of conflict. That's the key. Pretty fascinating, right? But then things get really crazy. These 7 kingdoms gradually start to unify through, you guessed it, more political scheming. A powerful kingdom emerges and is about to declare, hooray, we've unified the land. And just then, here come the Vikings. The Vikings. This is when they show up. When you think of pirates, you think of Vikings. Where'd they come from? Scandinavia. You could just picture them, right? Big-horned helmets, axes, terrifying. We think of them as just pirates, but they were actually people from Scandinavia, farmers and lords who would also engage in piracy. They weren't full-time pirates. When the farmers and lords from back home came to invade and plunder, they were called Vikings. So, what was it like way back when? This is where it gets interesting. Originally, there were various tribes, like the Celts and whatnot. But who was the major ancient influence? Rome, of course. You can't talk about European history without talking about Rome. In the south, you had a huge influence from ancient Greece around the Mediterranean. But after the age of Greece, Rome basically built everything. As they say, all roads lead to Rome. For a time, Europe was Rome. And then he came, Caesar. He just shows out of nowhere. Rome invades these nameless islands. When Caesar arrived, they weren't even sure if this area, Britain, was an island or not. They just knew that people called the Britons lived there, so they apparently called the area Britannia. Britain, sounds familiar, right? It all starts from around here. The land of the Britons was Britannia. Caesar shows up, but because of some trouble back home, he has to leave. But Rome doesn't give up. Later, Emperor Claudius comes along. And this is way back in 58 BC when Caesar arrived. We're talking about 2,100 years ago. You're like, Caesar was that long ago? But yeah. Anyway, Emperor Claudius comes and conquers about the southern half of the land. We'll just breeze through this part. He takes a firm hold of the area around England and called it Britannia, a province of Rome. So in the beginning, they were ruled by Italy. Well, not Italy, but Rome. They were ruled by Rome. But later, as you know, the Roman Empire started to weaken and split into East and West. Then came the great migration of the Germanic peoples, which you might remember from world history. Tribes were pushed westward from the east, and when Rome's grip on its western territories loosened, they pulled out. So with the decline of the Roman Empire and the migration of Germanic tribes, Roman rule disappeared. You'd think, great, we're free, right? Wrong. That's when the Germanic tribes themselves show up. The Great Migration was no joke. They even crossed the sea to get to the island. And this is a key point. People often say Britain is similar to Japan because it's an island nation. And sure, on the far edges of the Eurasian continent, you have the island nations of Japan and Britain, And today, Japan has its emperor, and Britain has its royal family. So two island kingdoms on opposite ends of the continent, lots of similarities. But there's one huge difference between Japan and Britain. The sea separating Japan from the mainland is about 50 kilometers wide. The Dover Strait, which separates Britain from the mainland, is only 30 kilometers wide. You might think, what's a 20-kilometer difference? But it's huge. There used to be a popular TV show where they had a segment about swimming across the English Channel. People attempt it all the time. That's how close it is to the continent. You don't see many TV shows trying to swim from Japan to Busan, do you? It's apparently a bit too tough. So except for the Mongol invasions, Japan hasn't really had to worry about being invaded from the sea. But Britain, they get invaded over and over again. First came Rome. Under Roman rule, they established a major city called Londinium, which meant a fort in the marsh. This later became London. So the location of London was considered prime real estate even back then. Okay, so Rome leaves, and the Germanic peoples arrive. These tribes, like the Angles and the Saxons, are collectively known as the Anglo-Saxons. You probably heard that term. They came over and established 7 kingdoms right around the area of England. The original inhabitants, the Britons, were pushed over into the area of Wales.
And from here on out, things start to feel very British. From this period, Britain begins to increase its presence within Europe. There's still a long way to go until the Industrial Revolution makes it explode onto the world stage. That's the Golden Age. But eventually, the balance of power will crumble, and the footsteps of the world wars will begin to draw near.